sind vollständig, das heißt, wir können auch wirklich beginnen.
So everybody seems to be in. We can start. Welcome back to the third and last session of this conference with the topic investing in a world without AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria. What are the right arguments? We have time until 4 o'clock Central European time to discuss this topic, and it was mentioned already that in terms of the implementation of the change, the architecture investments are necessary, and this is what we're gonna discuss about in details. And I want to Dianne, Peter Sands have already mentioned what our UNAIDS report, which was published to the World AIDS Day, which was the following: we have to combat inequalities in order to be successful in the struggle against the current pandemics and future pandemics. And in order to implement this goal, and all panelists agreed on this, we had in the previous sessions, therefore we need investments. And with that, we're already in the middle of our topic. Before entering the session, I want to shortly present myself. My name is Melanie Otto. I'm a human rights activist, and I'm working in the Action Against AIDS in Germany. And together with co-moderator Sergius Seebohm will be the moderators, and I hand over to him. Yes, thank you, Melanie. Hello to everybody, also from my side. My name is Sergius Seebohm, the Friends of the Global Fund Europe, and indeed, the ambitious plan, as Melanie already described it, has been and is that we want to draw the lessons from the past in terms of the global health structure, and we want to discuss this with the hope with newly elected politicians in the newly elected German parliament. Indeed, this is what we hope for. We all know that the current situation is that the process of forming the government is still ongoing, and therefore it was not possible to have representatives of all the democratic parties here with us to this debate today. But we're more than happy that we could gain Mr. Hermann Gröhe as a member of the German parliament of the Christian Democratic Party and former health minister. He will join in for the discussion after the inputs of the panelists. So for the discussion, we first want to gain some input. We invited 3 really interesting colleagues. I'm glad to present Tilman Rüppel from the Missionsärztliches Institut Würzburg, and Kydd Wright, Director of the Global Fund Advocates Network, and Dianne Stewart of the Global Fund. And as a rapporteur, we have Jaime Atienza Azcona of UNAIDS with us. Yes, and Jaime will also be one of our speakers. He will be a rapporteur. And the rapporteur is Brian Teixeira. Brian, can you just show shortly your face? And maybe switch on your microphone.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Teixeira. I've been activist for a long time in HIV work. I live in France right now.
Thank you, Brian. And just as in the other sessions, he will bring in some input from the community perspectives of the community, the lessons he took from this debate here. And this will be published online together with the documentation of this conference. We're looking forward to your article. So let's come to the guiding questions. There are 3 questions which we will be dealing with in this round. what is the current need? How much does it need to combat HIV and AIDS, but also tuberculosis, malaria, to end this to 2030, by 2030, but also the other way around. What would it mean if we don't do enough? We want to talk about what are the necessary organizations, the channels we need, which role does play the Global Fund, the UNAIDS, and what does the German civil society think about a fair share of Germany in this part, in this context? These are questions which we are very important, especially in the year before the replenishment. Yes, and with this, I hand over the floor to our first speaker, Tilman Rüppel. Welcome, Tilman. He's a political scientist and political advocacy officer in Würzburg, but we know each other from the Action Alliance Against AIDS. He was the president also in the Catholic column and member of the speakers of the Action Alliance Against AIDS. So what he's going to present to us, we've heard already in a working group, and we're looking forward to your insights, which is a fair share from the civil society that we have to invest, that needs to be steered. We got this just confirmed in the former sessions. And now let's hear from you how this could be shaped.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie, and also thank you for the opportunity to share the slides with you and to share our thoughts on how Germany's fair contribution to the Global Fund should look like. I'm, as you already said, Melanie, I'm Tilman Rüppel. I'm advocacy consultant at Medical Mission Institute Würzburg, and I'm also one of the speakers of Action Against AIDS Germany. So when it comes to Germany's fair share and how we calculate it, the main question that arises at first, of course, is why the need to, or why do we consider as the German civil society, it is important to measure or to calculate such a fair share. And the main reason is the divergence between the financial ask and financial need concerning the Global Fund. For example, when you recall the investment case for the Global Fund 6 replenishment, as you all probably know, the Global Fund ask was $14 billion US. However, in the same investment case, the Global Fund also wrote that this ask plus increased domestic resources and the already existing external funding only adds up to 82% of the total need according to the target set in the global plans. And actually that another $18 billion US are needed to reach 100% of the global plans. So actually there's more funding needed, and that is we try to answer three main questions to calculate Germany's fair share. How much money does the Global Fund then actually need in the future? And for the 7th replenishment, of course. Then what should Germany's fair contribution be? And how to account for Germany's contribution to the European Union, because the EU is another funder of the Global Fund as well. And of course, Germany is one of the main contributors to the European Union. So when it comes to Global Fund's financial needs to fight the 3 epidemics, we adopted Gfan's calculated total fair share for the 7th replenishment. And this calculation was based on first global financial needs assessments on fighting HIV, TB, and malaria. Then as well, international development finance's share of total spending against the 3 epidemics, and also Global Fund's share of total international development finance against the 3 epidemics. Just to give a quick example for HIV/AIDS, how this was calculated, the global resource needs against HIV/AIDS are approximately at the moment, of course, the pandemic is still ongoing, and maybe this is going to change, but for now equals $29 billion US in 2025. And the international development share of finances against HIV/AIDS at the moment is approximately 50%. So 50% multiplied with $29 billion obviously is $14.5 billion. And then the global funds share of international development share is roughly between 20 and 25%. So when you calculate this percentage with the $14.5 billion, you arrive at approximately $3 billion. And here on the right-hand side, you can see for HIV, the global fund's annual share, the before mentioned $3 billion. And also you can see how much for TB, malaria, and also strengthening community-led responses should be calculated. And then you arrive at 9.5 billion per year, which accumulates to 28.5 billion in total for the 7th replenishment. So that is exactly the financing need that we adopted. And so how do we calculate Germany's fair share to the 7th replenishment? Basically, what is most important is that it's based on core mandate of the Global Fund and also on donors' economic strength per capita, which is important. So Germany's fair share aims at the Global Fund's core mandate. That basically means excluding COVID-19 resources that have to be added on top of that. Then countries should allocate finances to the Global Fund according to economic strength per capita. That is why we adopted OECD development assistance countries, development assistance committee countries, instead of Global Fund donor countries or high income countries. We also used the gross national income instead of gross domestic product. And we took the average from the years 2017 until 2021, instead of one base year, just to avoid, or especially to avoid statistical bias. And to account for the EU allocated finances to the Global Fund, which is of course partially funded by Germany's contributions. We took the EU pledge to the Global Fund for the 6th replenishment, which was $640 million. And we accounted for Germany's share of the EU budget in 2020, which was pretty much exactly 20%. So here are the calculations. Germany's gross national income divided by the gross national income of all DAC countries multiplied with Gfan's total fair share is actually the Germany's fair share of all development assistance committee countries, in our opinion. And then to account for Germany's EU contribution, this fair share of all DAC countries is subtracted with the EU pledge to the Global Fund multiplied with Germany's contribution to the EU budget. And then we receive Germany's fair share, which is, when you put in all the numbers, $2.13 billion, and calculated with the exchange rate from mid-November, this equals 1.8 billion euros. And this is exactly the fair share that we recommend, and we ask the German government to pledge at the 7th replenishment of the Global Fund next year, 1.8 billion euros. Thank you, and now I'm looking forward for the discussion.
Thank you, Tilman. That was very, very interesting, but we will move on right away to the next input. Because of course we want to understand more about the 28.5 billion that you already mentioned in your presentation as a calculation brought forward by the Global Fund's Advocate Network. And we are very pleased and honored to have the director of the Global Fund Advocates Network, or Gfan as we like to say, here with us. She's an extremely experienced political advisor, very experienced campaigner, and for almost 10 years now with Gfan. She's here with us from Canada, Katy Kydd Wright. And Katy, you will tell us a little bit about how to get us back on track in the fight against AIDS, TB, and malaria, given the tremendous setback of the COVID-19 pandemic. and you will explain your calculation.
Yeah, thanks. It's really great to be here. And it's really great to see that bold and ambitious ask for Germany's fair share. So congratulations to the German advocates for working through all of that. Today we were asked to think about, what are the right arguments to invest in a world without AIDS, TB, and malaria? And I might just be like too hopelessly an optimist, but I mean, really, what other option do we have? Like, I joined some of the sessions earlier today, and the same points keep being raised. And Sasha Volgina said it very clearly this morning from GNP Plus that we need more money, not less money in global health. This is not a time for maintenance or austerity. Is it really viable for us to continue to shortchange the systems for health? We are all currently living the multi-trillion-dollar, multiple years result of not having strong and resilient health systems throughout the world. So from our perspective, from Gfan's perspective, it's time for bold and ambitious action. And if we want to be better prepared, we have to invest now. We have to be better prepared for the next pandemic, and we have to eliminate the weaknesses that allow pandemics to take hold, which includes eliminating the ones we already have, like HIV, TB, and malaria, to promote better overall health and access to health so that fewer people are vulnerable to future threats. Over the last year, as the Global Fund has tried to take a moment in this crazy COVID world to reflect on the past 20 years of its history, they've encouraged us to think about that and to think about the foundations of the Global Fund. And for me, the history and the foundation of the fund is built on community mobilization, on activism, and a sense that we were doing it wrong, that we were doing it unequally, and that there's a better, more equitable, more country-led, and more just way to respond. And I think we're exactly there again, 20 years later. COVID has laid bare the systemic challenges. That means we simply have inequitable access, and we can see it much more clearly. So how do we get back on track towards the SDGs, reverse the losses of the last 2 years, and make new gains as long as we have seen for so long through the history of the Global Fund, gain after gain after gain. And for the first time, a few setbacks this year, important to address. So how do we do it? We have to invest money, and a lot of it. We launched our ask, as you mentioned already, last week, and it's a very simple methodology based on an analysis of the currently available global plans for the 3 diseases and the historical proportional share of the Global Fund's investments in Global Fund eligible countries. And that's how we come up with our 28.5 billion. We have to fully fund those global plans. They are well thought through. They contain a lot of really important planning, and they contain the best, newest reflections on what's needed at the current moment to address the 3 diseases. But in addition to funding the global plans, we also have to find a way to increase our funding specifically to community-led and community-based systems for health. I think I heard a speaker earlier today also say that we used to say that communities couldn't do this work at a high level, but again and again through C19RM and other mechanisms, and most importantly, in the absence of coordinated approaches to responding to COVID, community-based services have stepped up and found ways to continue to deliver services safely to support the populations they serve and work to keep them safe and healthy. And so during the last Global Fund strategy creation process, which some of you probably were involved in, we heard again and again the need to fund community-led services and monitoring. And the new strategy does include a more sort of whole of systems approach to develop and integrate community systems for health, and an intention to establish the strategies, the data systems, the policies, and the funding frameworks to entrench and fund the role of communities in resilient and sustainable systems for health. So now we have to fund that, which is why our Gfan ask also includes a $4.5 billion ask over the 3 years for strengthening community-led systems, because money matters. We cannot achieve what is set out within the new strategy and what we need to do in this COVID world without significant new funds. And yes, 28.5 billion is a huge number, but we have chosen specifically to not provide a discount on what is needed. Of course, innovation, better value for money, all of that is critical, and it may be more challenging for us to see a clear pathway to raising this huge amount of money, but this 28.5 billion, this is a clear expression of what is needed. It's likely that, when we do see the Global Fund's investment case, that our figures will be a little off. They were, Tilman, you mentioned it, they were a little bit different during the last investment. We expect that again. And we at Gfan have always worked collaboratively with the Secretariat, with Dianne, who's on the same panel, and the rest of the external relations team. And we've worked with them again in the development of this ask. We've worked with the new health financing department as we've developed it. And when we see the Global Fund investment case, we will again work together. We have the same common objective. And for the past decade of Gfan's existence, we've always found ways to align our efforts, even if we are not always alike. So our ask is what we feel is needed to reach the targets in the global plans and fully fund the efforts of the Global Fund and get us back on track to ending the 3 diseases in a COVID world. And it would be great if we could count on Germany's continued leadership in global health and bring us closer to what's needed. So opening comments, looking forward to the further discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katy, Kydd, Wright. Let's see if that's really off, as you say, and what the perspectives of the Secretariat are. We now have the opportunity to listen to Dianne Stewart, who has been the companion for the Global Fund almost from the start. In some years in between, she went on to work with other organizations, but is back since 2017 and is now the Global Fund's Deputy Director for External Relations. We're very grateful that you are here again, Dianne. Let us know about the point of view of the Global Fund. You certainly know that the civil society organizations that just presented their views, that they mean well. What's your view?
Thank you very much, Sergius, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, I'm very grateful to the other speakers for laying out a very ambitious plan for us. The Global Fund loves ambition, and we love to contribute. So I think the basic premises on which those asks are built, I think we will all agree, right? The Global Fund has been a vital instrument to achieving the remarkable results we've achieved over the last 20 years, 44 million lives saved, HIV infections halved, a reduction in the death rate of 65%. So we have a lot of a track record of really making a big difference against these 3 diseases, and we need to step up and continue to do that. As you know, we responded to the COVID-19 crisis over the last 2 years by raising and investing an additional $4 billion on top of the $4 billion we spend annually for AIDS, TB, and malaria, just to try and mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the results that we had achieved for AIDS, TB, and malaria. And we did that with, of course, the generous help of Germany as well, who contributed twice to our COVID-19 response mechanism, both in 2020 and in 2021. So we have a long-standing relationship and track record with all of our partners of responding aggressively when we see the need. And we pivoted quickly to try and protect the gains that we have all made. But even with that huge mitigating effort, COVID-19 did have a devastating impact, particularly on HIV/AIDS. So one of the things we were very proud of is that we managed to maintain everybody who was on treatment, and in fact made a number of innovative changes to the way we do treatment in order to ensure that everybody who had life-saving treatment continued to receive it. In fact, we increased by just over 8% the number of people receiving treatment for antiretroviral treatment for HIV/AIDS. So that's a little bit of the good news. But unfortunately, pretty much everything else is really bad news. There's been a huge reduction in people accessing prevention services. Across the board, a decline of about 11%. But when you look closely at some things like voluntary medical male circumcision, that dropped by 27%. And when we look at some of the things that are very worrying, like reductions in the number of women receiving prevention of mother-to-child treatment, or the number of people initiating antiretroviral therapy, which went down significantly. All of those are worrying because they definitely signal that we will have more HIV positive people in the future. So the fact that prevention services were so devastated is a big worry. And of course, for some of the most vulnerable communities, like our adolescent girls and young women that we've been so concerned about in sub-Saharan Africa, 6 out of 7 new infections in sub-Saharan Africa amongst 15 to 19-year-olds are still adolescent girls and young women. So we've done very little to move that number. And with 5 million girls out of school because of the lockdowns of COVID-19, you can see the potential risk factor in one of those vulnerable groups is enormous. We also know that some of our most vulnerable groups, like LGBTQI people or men who have sex with men, were particularly affected by the COVID restrictions and a number of the human rights violations that were part of some of the very strict lockdowns. These were communities who were really marginalized even further by COVID-19. So what does all that mean? It all means that there's no way we don't need more money for the Global Fund for the next period. The question, of course, is how much? We're in the midst of creating our investment case. As has already been described, we do that from a very bottom-up approach, looking at the global plans for AIDS, TB, and malaria, and looking for the needs that we see there. We know that there's going to be a significant increase in those needs. The Global Fund, as Tilman mentioned, considers that for HIV, we need to cover between 20 to 25% of international financing for HIV. We know that we have a huge problem in tuberculosis because we really had major setbacks, drops of up to 30% of people initiating onto TB treatment. That's a death sentence, especially for MDR TB or XDR TB. So we're going to need to invest more on HIV, on TB, and malaria, where we were seeing such amazing results and so many countries becoming malaria-free or close to becoming malaria-free. We don't want to lose the momentum on malaria. So there's a lot more needs. We're calculating at least between 25 to 30% increased needs just on AIDS, TB, and malaria. So I think we all agree on the numbers on the needs, right? We also need to look at what we're going to do on health system strengthening, and as Katy was pointing out, particularly community health systems. Our new strategy puts communities at the center of our response. And so we're very much going to be looking for ways to increase some of the innovative community-based outreach that we've been doing during COVID. Strengthening those systems, investing in those there. As you know, one of the calculations that we take into account, and it was mentioned already, is domestic resource mobilization and domestic financing. So we're definitely going to need to look at how that domestic funding was how we did over the last 3 years for the 6th replenishment, and where the countries stood. Data shows that they did. And of course, the data over the last 2 years shows a big spike in health spending because countries were spending more on COVID-19. What we can't allow to happen is for that to slide back. And of course, with the economic stresses that many low and middle income countries are under right now, there is a potential that there will be less domestic financing available. So we're looking at all of those calculations, working closely with the IMF and others to see what we think will be possible for countries to invest. And of course, we have the global plan, sustainable finance accelerator that we work with all our partners. So we're looking together with all of those partners from the accelerator at what the trends in financing will be.
Dianne,
And
I think we have a few technical issues.
Will tell us whether we can be even more ambitious, and shown us the value of investment, right? The economic.
Dianne, we had a few technical issues, but we also have to come to an end, like the last sentence. Can you just repeat that?
Sure. So my final point is that we are looking at pandemic preparedness. So that is another piece of the puzzle that we need to put into place. The pandemic preparedness will be a subset of resilient and sustainable systems for health, which we already invest in. And we just have to decide how big that health systems piece of the puzzle will be. And obviously the German-led G7 will help us to see the role that the Global Fund needs to play on pandemic preparedness. So apologies, I'm in South Africa at the moment and my network is not very stable. So I hope you heard what I said. Thank you.
Thank you, Dianne. And thanks for that overview. I would just like, I'm just watching the time, so I would just give the word to Jaime now. Jaime Atienza Azcona is a development economist and the incoming chief of the health financing team at UNAIDS. So Jaime, you spent like 2 decades working in development financing, and yeah, now we would like to hear like your point of view of of the discussion. So I would just give the word to you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Thanks very much, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here speaking on behalf of our executive director, Ms. Winnie Van Gima, that sends you greetings in the day where we have launched the World AIDS Day, and in a day that means so much for all of us in this room, I am sure, and where we are looking back and happy for all that has been achieved, but very concerned about what we see into the future, and my colleagues have made a very clear case. Let me speak in 5 points, 1 minute each. That's what I try to do. Melanie, bear with me and wave a hand when it's too late. First, I just want to say that we have just launched our World AIDS report, and you know that we are talking about ending inequalities to end pandemics. That's what you say, end inequalities, you end AIDS, then you end pandemics. So we need financing, and financing is the shop I lead on for UNAIDS, but there are other areas that we need to take into account very much. This World AIDS Days report says we need increasing community-led infrastructure as part of public health systems. We've talked about this. It needs to happen. It has impact, and it's very important. UNAIDS is a very close friend of community organizations and the social movements around the social AIDS movement. Second is that we need fair and affordable access to science and medicines, because we are seeing this not happening in the COVID crisis, and we see the impact, and the countries that are worse off are the ones experiencing the worst impact. So it's a triple shock, we could say, if we want to try to build it on it, as we see the delays in vaccination and in economic recovery. Third, we want to see protection for health workers. Fourth, we want to defend and to enhance human rights. Without human rights, some of the transformations cannot happen, and some of the economic impacts we see we will not be able to counter them, because human rights are needed for the rights of the people, but also have some economic implications and bring additional costs. And finally, we need adequate financing for this. Some good numbers have been placed here by my colleague from the Global Fund and from the previous session. I think that's, for me, good enough. Let me move to my second point. Let's look at the numbers, just some raw numbers. In between 2017 and 2020, we had a minus 3.5% investment compared to what was needed. So first we grew, then we stagnated, and then we were sliding behind. This is untenable if we want to get to the results of the AIDS in 2030. Sorry, and it's a huge toll that we're going to be facing. And in our report, we say that the lives that will be lost to AIDS if we don't take action and change course will be 7.7 million lives. We cannot avoid all those losses, but we can avoid the loss of 4.6 million lives. We need to think about those 4.6 million people. Because I'm in Germany today with you, even though I'm digitally from Geneva, I was looking at the German population. I was thinking, well, that's more or less like the population of Berlin and Frankfurt together that we can save if we take the right action. That's how we need to think. And Germany has been a great partner of UNAIDS and a great partner of the AIDS response of the Global Fund, and we want Germany to keep doing that. So that's something to keep in mind. Numbers. Cost of inaction. Well, I already mentioned the largest cost of inaction, the people's lives, the life toll. But let's look at some numbers. If we bring to that bill the cost of discrimination, especially homophobic discrimination, the AIDS deaths and the loss of productivity that it brings. I'm sorry for bringing such only economicist angles, but I think it's important to bear them in mind. And also the lifetime costs of HIV treatments. We end up with a very, very large bill of 358 billion per year. We need an investment of 29 billion per year. That's $1 investment for $12 impact on these very large numbers. So there's a return on investment to treatment and fighting HIV that is really amazing. The estimates say it's between a $6 and a $12 return on investment. So for each dollar, you get 6 to 12 economic return on investment, not to mention lives that have, of course, no price. Let me get to my final comments. You asked me to comment, what's the joint work that UNAIDS does with the Global Fund? Are you the good partners? How do you collaborate? And I have to say the Global Fund is an amazing partner for us. We partner with governments at country level, and the Global Fund is an essential piece that brings the financing for the operations in a large number of countries. We have a division of labor that is very natural and works well. We work very closely to governments and very closely to civil society actors. The Global Fund brings in all the financing and all the perspective and all that analysis, and we work jointly and making it work. We help countries to build the best possible projects that drive the highest impact of every dollar invested through the Global Fund. And we work hand in hand with the amazing, by the way, health economics or health financing team that has been built by the Global Fund. I can only congratulate my colleagues for that, and especially their director, Calypso Chalkido, my peer with whom I work very closely. So working closely with governments and civil society is our added value, and having foots on the ground. We are in the countries, in over 80 countries, working closely with those governments and being able to bring the views and make sure that we have that interface between the grassroots, the governments and the international donors. That's our place. And finally, just let me say that it's essential to have UNAIDS to continue play this big part of the response. We are a small actor compared to others, and especially compared to the Global Fund in terms of the numbers, but we are an important piece of what needs to make this response work. We are very grateful to the German funding. The German government has funded UNAIDS in the last year with $10 million. And on top of that, they brought a very large COVID and AIDS fund to look at the impacts and try to counter those essences. We are very grateful, and we want to continue with that. And let me finish by saying, having our colleagues here, that the replenishment of the Global Fund is an important part of that global response. It's not the only part, but it's a very important part. We encourage Germany to go for that replenishment with a very high energy, and we encourage also a continued investment with UNAIDS and in the collaboration with civil society. Let me finish here, and I'm happy to connect in the dialogue.
Thank you, Jaime. And yeah, coming back to all of you, thanks a lot for your inputs. We will go through to the discussion, and I'm looking really forward to speak to all of you. So after these inputs, now we hope like it's really clear that we don't have to speak about yeah, that we have to invest, and that we have to that we need more money to invest to fight pandemics. And you all were talking about like fighting inequality and the importance of community-led and yeah, human rights-led responses. So now I would like to speak to Hermann Gröhe. Like you heard all the inputs, and like first of all, before we start the discussion, it's a question like what means investing. We heard a little bit about that, and the question is like in what ways do we have to invest, in what ways can we invest? There's a financial investing, like that's one part and one really important part, because we heard also Dianne, like without that we can't do nothing. And there's a structural investing, and the community-led responses, human right-based responses, strengthening health systems. Like we heard in the session before, we also spoke to Heike Behrens, and she told us as well, like that's one really important point of the coalition contract. So Hermann Gröhe, we are really pleased to have you here as a parliamentary representative and a former Ministry of Health, like to 2018. And with your experience and expertise in regarding global health policy. And we spoke before, so you said also you are a friend of Peter Sens, and you know each other really well. So it's really interesting to hear your opinion. Like you heard all the inputs. What is your opinion on a welfare share, and about like thinking about solidarity instead of like global security or something like that?
First of all, I have to ask Melanie, I was said that I could speak in German.
Yes.
There will be interpretation. It's easier for me to be more precise. Otherwise, I can try to do it in English. But
no, you can speak in German.
Okay, so switch to German. Thank you very much also to the interpreters. Zunächst will ich einmal...
First of all, I want to say, because I'm the only representative of the parliament here, formerly belonging to the government and now to the opposition. So I try to be fair, and I want to start by saying that especially the Global Fund in the German parliament has very high esteem, and we can fix this also with names. Heidemarie Wieczorek-Zeul, former Social Democratic Minister for Economic and Development, Christoph Hauser, who is also active in the Global Fund. So there's high esteem for the Global Fund, and there is an understanding about the importance of their work in order to combat AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. But it's also what we see with all the challenges of antibiotics resistances from Ebola to COVID, health system strengthening is the decisive task, and the Global Fund has a really excellent role in that. And therefore, over the last years from Parliament, there was always support from the government of Angela Merkel. The funding was raised. This was never a debate between the different political parties. There was wide range esteem. And I also want to highlight that this support is not only a financial one. It's also about their content, the issue about being based on human rights approach to combat the disease in a solidaric way with these people who are affected, combating stigmatization. 30 years ago in Germany, also in my parliament, in my party, we had hot debates about that. And after all, it was about Rita Süßmuth, who was decisive in finding a consensus between the political level and the civil society that we pursue this human rights-based approach against stigmatization. In Germany, over the last 30 years, there was nothing like in some other countries where with the change of government, especially in this topic, the political orientation will change completely. Now in Germany, this was a steady attitude for many years from Germany through the civil society and the democratic political parties, which led to the situation that the strategy of UNAIDS and strategy of Global Fund, we supported through all the different parties and say this is the right way. And to this belongs also the high esteem of community-led services. During the Ebola West African crisis, I was in Liberia and in Ghana, and I know, especially in terms of infectious diseases, how central it is to get into these different communities, people with information, and where we need professional support. And as soon as this is not possible, really the community-led activities are so important, and they made a great job. And so this is really, really important. So what I want to say with all that is it's not only the global fund on an abstract level, not only the need that we need appropriate funding, but also the strategic orientation, human rights-based, anti-stigmatization based. This really has our full support through all the political parties. I can't hide, and I say this in the direction of all the parties, I can't hide that we always have to show that we really take seriously international solidarity, not only driven by crisis through Ebola or COVID, but on a general terms, we have to pursue this in a consequent way, even though the news are not in the headlines every day. And this is still what we have to prove, because over the last years, our efforts have been increased thanks to COVID, in quotation marks, and even if one day we have left this terrible pandemic behind, there should be no doubt that we could not lower our efforts because the lessons from the pandemics is the weaker the health systems are, the more expensive and the next epidemics will hit us, and the stronger they will hit us. And so we have to prove that even though there is not a crisis which is in the headlines of the news, we still need to live up to our obligations. So as an invitation to civil society, I want to say there is still a lot to do, and the coalition contract is not very ambitious in that sense. And seeing that in a positive way, we can say, okay, there was no debate on that. We'll continue in the same line. The chapter on global health in line is shorter than what is written about fishery or cycle lanes and other challenges. But maybe this is due to the fact that there is no need to changes, but of course we lack a clear commitment to certain issues. So there is still potential for the parliament, and especially in the cooperation for development. We've seen over the last years that the parliament in no other area worked in such a unanimity as in this field. And we want to be a constructive opposition. We want that Germany stands up with what they committed for over the last years in terms of global health, no matter who is in government in Germany. So therefore, the institutions we have a special committee on global health, we have the Global Health Hub, we have a closer cooperation in research, that all this should be used also to remind the political sphere that we have to do more. The figures have been presented, and we're waiting for the investment case of the Global Fund. But the figures are clear, and the truth is that the last miles are always the most difficult ones. We got out of our rhythm through COVID. We've seen backlashes in this area, also in education and nutrition. But what we can see that the good things we could achieve over the last 20 years, there's no reason to lean back, but it's an obligation to do more. And we can reach this ambitious goal to erase AIDS and other pandemics. In the current legislative period, we've given 1 billion, and the budget counts of 630 millions for the next year. This is not enough. So development politicians from Social Democrats underlined in the last years that We have to adapt the plannings to the real needs. And but what we could say in the budget plan for 2022, there is 630 millions. 630 millions are foreseen as a, but I think we should put more money. As a member of the future opposition, I will make it easy and say yes. We start with 1.8 billions, and we'll talk with people from Gavi, with Find, with UNITED, and others. And I'm only speaking about the health area, but at least I want to make sure there shouldn't be a step backwards behind the last round, but there should be, in addition, a supplement, and we will fight for this. This will not be an easy debate, though. And let me say one last sentence, I think, which is really important. And I know that with Christopher Ben, I've been talking before. I followed the plenary session this morning, and we need, all in all, a further development of the financing of the global health structures. Angela Merkel, in the last digital special session of the WHO, said 50% of the core expenses should be covered by compulsory payments, and in the context of replenishment, and which could be all collected through volunteer contributions with or without earmark for a concrete purpose. This needs to be checked all if we really want to learn the lessons from the pandemics and come to a better preparation for the next challenges. And therefore, the financial means have to be really clearly analyzed, and people like me, we have them in all the democratic parties, no matter if they're in government or in opposition, in science and civil society. They will join into this struggle that Germany will be up to their leadership role. And if there is an area, and this was mentioned by Peter this morning, what is really needed on a humanitarian level, and which is also in our own interest, then through the pandemic, we can see it. We only won if we win everywhere against the pandemic, and the dramatic inequalities between diagnosis, therapy, and prevention is not only a humanitarian scandal, it also puts at risk all over success and allegedly safe areas. I always keep this saying, it's not an alternative to discuss about vaccinations in your own country. We can see this with Omicron now, and which have a connection with HIV infections, that if we have a weak point at one point in the world, always is a threat for the other parts in the world too. And it's not altruism which drives us, it's a humanitarian motivation, but also in a healthy own interest if we try to strengthen the whole system. And therefore we need a civil society, especially in terms of AIDS, stigmatization, and for the access of the weakest to therapy. This wouldn't have happened without the pressure of civil society, and we need to work together in that sense. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Gröhe. Difficult to stop you because you mentioned so many important points.
Switching back to English, and thank you again, Mr. Gröhe, also for stressing the point that health is not or should not be a partisan issue. I think this is, especially in the face of the debates that we're facing around COVID, something that cannot be stressed enough. And it's great to hear it again and again. Let's unpack the various points that we've heard so far in this segment a little bit. And I want to ask Katy about this, because the first thing that I want to start unpacking is the very important point that also Jaime raised about human rights and the role of communities. And Katy, you made the specific point that we need to set aside a specific portion of investment for the work with communities. Can you tell us a little bit more about your thoughts and Gfan's thoughts around that specific segment, the role of communities and the needs to invest here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no, one of the challenges in coming up with our ask is that there's so much that's still in development as we were developing our own ask, right? The Global Fund strategy wasn't finished before we were, sort of doing our main portion of work. The investment case is not out. The conversations around a pandemic treaty and what some of those, global health threats councils and all of those other mechanisms are not there. So really finding the right space for the Global Fund within what is a continually evolving conversation about pandemic preparedness in particular is a bit challenging to put like a number and put your finger exactly on it at this time, right? This is a challenging thing to do. And so what we have felt for many years and through a lot of the advocacy that we've done and our members have done is that, the governance, the structure, the intent, the purpose, the way the Global Fund works is quite unique when it comes to civil societies and communities, entrenched within governance, entrenched within sort of the main sort of mechanism for co-creating and designing Global Fund grants at the CCM level. Nothing's perfect, right? Nothing is ever perfect, but it is quite unique and has had tremendous success and has shown itself to be a learning organization over the years. And so from our perspective, we really see the value add for the Global Fund within this sort of new COVID world on really expanding that community-led, community-based sort of services, because that's what they've been doing. And that's what the Global Fund has been working towards and championing within other spaces all along, right? I can tell a story about how it is that I ended up and how Gfan ended up supporting civil society and communities within the ACT Day platform. And it's frankly because of very close relationships with Dianne and Peter and Francoise, who were seeing this new ACT Day structure come together and seeing that there was a need to entrench, embed community and civil society voices in that conversation. And now, a year and a half later, we have 47 community and civil society reps who are sitting within the various working groups and pillars of the ACT Day structure. And that's really critical for that work. That's really critical for those voices and that expertise to be heard at those at all of those levels. Again, imperfect, but better than the other options. And so from our perspective in our ask, the reason that we embedded that 1.5 billion is to try and create that space around that issue that the Global Fund itself is uniquely positioned to address within sort of the global health architecture, or at least one of the very unique organizations. And that is to support community led and community-based services, because that's what the Global Fund has been doing. And so that figure to some extent is not invented, but is meant to be consistent with the additional sort of resources that the Global Fund has needed over the last year and a half, 2 years in responding to COVID. And so we just kind of rounded it off there. And we're not making a pitch for a specific modality. We think that generally speaking, some of this will become obvious as we go forward, but that additional money that specifically focuses on this and that enables sort of a strong rollout of that particular element of the strategy that has now been defined and finalized. That's why that ask is there, and that's why we put that specific money there, because we think that's the Global Fund's unique sort of value add, not just in the programs it delivers around AIDS, TB, and malaria, but also in this evolving sort of pandemic preparedness and response architecture.
Thank you, Katy. I would like to ask Jaime, because we heard from you as well of the complementary role of the institutions, of the existing institutions. We also heard in the sessions before that there should not be one or another. There should be the definition of the global health structure that includes all the existing institutions and the functional institutions, because they're working. So my question would be, like you also told us, what are the costs? And I really like that, because it's not just the economic part, but what are the costs of not investing? And there's one argument that we should just keep in mind, and that's lives. it costs lives. So the question is, how should we invest? How should we invest? Like seeing the replenishment next year, seeing G7, and seeing the existing institutions. How can we strengthen these institutions and the existing principles?
Well, thank you very much, Melanie, and thanks for that question. The first thing to answer that, the first thing I think we need to kind of tell to ourselves as a piece in this global fight in which we are together and work together and partner very strongly and tightly, is that as a result of the COVID crisis, we have now realized that investment in health are hard investments, are as hard as bridges, are as hard as other infrastructures. So we are no longer in front of a piece of the budgets that is under discussion and that falls apart. We are now in part of something that is central, and now health ministers everywhere are critical figures in their governments, and that crosses across all geographies. And I think this new situation it means that we have like a totally different landscape and a new paradigm. And I think that's something that we need to be aware. I was listening to my colleague Dianne, to the colleague to Katy, and then to Mr. Gröhe speaking about that. And I was looking about those great numbers that the civil society was bringing. So it's a chorus of voices, of international actors, of local actors that need to end up in the strengthening of national health systems. We need stronger national health systems in the end. We have seen that the most resilient health systems have been able to fight better. We have also seen that inequalities act against. So we need a new system that helps counter those inequalities. Those that have been, and as we have been in Europe, lucky to have that access, or probably we have to say unfairly lucky or disproportionately lucky to have that access to all the medicines, have been the ones that have been have saved more lives, have prevented better the long-lasting crisis. Although now we are seeing the backlash in other countries, they are recovering more slowly, and now we see new variants, new close-ups, and we see that we need an integrated system, and we need to strengthen national systems. We need to do it jointly. It's very important that public systems integrate community-led infrastructure and community infrastructure as part of them, because we want to be, we want to reach every corner, and we want to reach every person. And we've seen that community-led responses are the most effective to make this happen. And without that, we will not be better placed to prepare for the future pandemic. So while we are talking today and we are very focused on AIDS and on the people living with HIV, on the people for whose life we fear and that we want to protect, we are also seeing that the action to protect people that are living with HIV or that are at risk of living or of being so, by protecting them, we are creating the future systems by stronger health systems, these large international funders, local governments working and interacting with other specialized bodies. And I think we need to make sure that in this time of stress, this is an harmonic environment, and that we have the better legal environment and also the most straight to action strategies. And I think that's what we are building these days. And that's probably the UNAIDS approach, human rights, the community approach, the adequate financing, and overall collaborating with all the other partners for the good of the people that are suffering this, and taking into account that lives are the highest toll. And then we do the numbers, and the numbers speak for themselves too, but we need to bring those two together.
Thanks, Jaime. Coming back to Dianne, Mr. Gröhe reminded us about the coalition treaty of the incoming German government, and maybe we shouldn't take it all too seriously because, as he already pointed out, this about global health, there are just a few sentences there because that document has to cover basically all German policies for the next 4 years. So let's not be all too critical about it, but nevertheless, I mean, the title of this conference is global health champion Germany, question mark, exclamation mark. So Dianne, you already mentioned in your first intervention the necessary moving pieces, the setback of the COVID crisis, the 3 diseases, the evolving question about where to go with PPR. And I mean, we're talking about finances, but finances never go without political leadership. If you could make a wish about political leadership and initiative by the German G7 presidency, what would it be?
Well, I hope my wish is granted, because we hope for continued very strong leadership by the German government for global health. I think, as Herr Gröhe was saying, we've been in a way spoiled by the incredibly strong support from the German government during the leadership of Chancellor Merkel, and very much bipartisan support as well across the Bundestag and also across government ministers. There's been a lot of change over the years, but the commitment to global health has been very strong. So we're very hopeful that that will continue. My understanding is that the coalition agreement was really capped at its length, and so we aren't going to assume that the short references are the whole of what Germany will continue to do on global health. But in fact, the way in which the German government has responded to the COVID crisis, I hope is an indication of how we will continue. As I said, they've been incredibly generous donors to the COVID-19 response, in addition to the long-standing support to many institutions in global health. And Germany has provided intellectual leadership as well for global health, both in pushing for better collaboration amongst global health institutes. And if anything, I think we have turbocharged that with the COVID-19 response. The Access to COVID Tools Accelerator brings together all of the partners in global health playing their role and working together. So I think in a way, we are advancing the German vision in many ways of global health in terms of WHO leadership, but all of the different institutions playing their role. So we hope to convince the new government that this is an important thing to continue. And frankly, the hard economic facts of the big price we've had to pay for COVID-19, and I think many speakers have referred to this, there is no doubt of the economic interests of investing in health, right? We have been making these arguments for decades. It was true when all of the teachers and the nurses were dying of HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's true today with how many people, over 5 million people lost to COVID-19 since the start of this crisis. These are all, productive members of society that we are losing. So it's a personal tragedy, but it's a tragedy for the countries and the economies as well. So I think we have to make the argument on many fronts. It's hopefully continued moral leadership from the German government, intellectual leadership around the kinds of things we need to do. I think the answer to the question, are we a vertical or a horizontal fund, I hope is a question of the past, because we've shown that global fund investments in AIDS, TB, and malaria over 20 years have built the health systems that responded to the COVID-19 crisis over the last 24 months. So those systems we invested in, the community health workers, the supply chain, etc., have been the backbone of this COVID response. So I think German
Dianne, you're
pressure.
breaking up.
Sorry. Should I stop my video maybe, Sergius? I was finishing anyway. It seems that my network gives up when I need to be quiet. Just to finish by saying, I think that moral leadership, the intellectual leadership, and then of course the financial leadership has been vital, and I hope will continue. So thank you. I hope I can come back on in a minute.
Thanks, Dianne. Tilman, same question for you. Do you have a wish for the G7?
Yeah, good question. Of course I do. As well for the replenishment next year, I would really like to see more funding, of course, and even more political leadership by Germany. And what I always wanted to say, when it comes to funding and German government, you have to consider that compared to 2019 levels, Germany has now invested additionally about $4 billion US, but at the same time, just the tax revenues from BioNTech are approximately for this year $4 billion US as well. So it's also a kind of the question if you think the glass is half full or half empty. Of course, it's good that those 4 billion are reinvested in global health, but could Germany do more? Yes, we think so, and should do more, and the German government could invest more. As you already said, Mr. Gröhe, of course, that's a difficult topic, especially politically. There are a lot of, I mean difficult because there are a lot of other, Gavi, for example, a lot of other institutions, and not just the Global Fund to invest in. And of course, you need bipartisan support and everything like that. But also when you look at the 2019 levels, Germany was only somewhere in the middle. It was nowhere close to the WHO recommendation of 0.1% economic funding in levels of economic capacity per capita. Sweden and Norway, for example, they fulfill 0.1% for a long time, but really the big economies of the world, like Germany, Japan, USA, France, they really they are left behind. So I would really like to see that at the G7 conference, Germany is really going to seize the opportunity, and also because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the really importance to now get into the driving seat, and so we can go, as a global community, get back on track for the global targets, the SDG 3 accomplishment, ending the epidemics of malaria, tuberculosis, and AIDS, universal health coverage, leave no one behind, all the targets and also the mechanisms via the Global Fund, Gavi, World Health Organization, they are already there. So what we would need now is more political will and more funding. And also just a last point, actually the G20 economies, they invested trillions during the pandemic now just to stabilize their economies, and even only a few percentage of these trillions, a few billions, or like, let's say 20 or 100 or 150 billions, they would completely suffice to fund global health for the entire planet. So that's how you should look at it, in my opinion, at least from a financial point of view. Thank you.
Thanks, Tilman. I had the plan to go to a 30-second challenge, but just like looking on the time, Mr. Gröhe has to go like really at 4 o'clock. So I would like to begin with him. And after that, Katy, I would like to hear how you would answer that question. And Jaime, so you have you have your 30-second challenge. And then we have to, unfortunately, we have to leave. Herr Gröhe.
Okay,
yeah.
To keep me short, I will try it in English. That's the best way to keep me short. First of all, what Tilman Rüppel was saying is just the needed civil society voice we need also next to the parliamentarian debate. Of course, it's fighting, foreseeing that this is investment. And as I said before, not only for humanitarian reasons, but also in a good understanding of our own interest. And the other thing is concerning what Jaime was saying on investment. I totally agree. It's spending in health is not just cost. We talk about investment. But to be frank, I remember quite well when we had the G20 presidency of Germany, it was not easy to convince the others that health is even an issue for the G20. I invited the first ever G20 health ministers meeting, and we had to convince even our colleagues that it will strengthen them back home if they are regarded to be in the core group running the development of a country by investing in human resources. So I'm totally agree that we need to strengthen that. And the last point is, next to human rights strategy, next to funding, we have a growing part where we have a lack of political awareness and shrinking space for civil society. I'm shocked what we can see in Central Asia and parts of Eastern Europe, where with smaller numbers than in Africa, but with a higher increase by percentage, we see a lack not of money, but a lack of political will even to address it. And also that is a human rights issue, that we cannot accept governments to neglect the issues at all. And so that's what I like to add. And I'm looking forward to closely cooperate with you in Germany so that we have the civil society needed debate and the parliamentarian needed debate to strengthen our effort together.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Gröhe. Katy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just close with, I think it was Jaime who said earlier, reminding us that, you know, at this time, like, ministers of health have never really been closer to the center of political power than they are right now in a more sort of broad-based way. And we have to, as advocates, as you know, people who promote the Global Fund and, you know, all of these UNAIDS and all of the other important initiatives that we know can get us to where we want to in terms of lives saved and reducing the impact of all of these epidemics. We need to break out of the boxes of our past approaches. We need to really adopt you know, a holistic view, and we really need to think about how we push governments in particular to think beyond the existing budget allocations, the existing pie of ODA, and we really need to think about breaking out of that and looking beyond ODA, because, you know, we've always needed to do that, but we maybe have never had as good of an opportunity to talk about that and to make people understand that as we do right now in terms of political power. So that's just my, you know, sort of final closing, that it's a different replenishment in so many ways for the Global Fund, but we just need to break free a little bit of our own past approaches and assumptions, because I think that the political power is there in a way that it maybe hasn't been in the past, and we should work to leverage that together.
Thank you, Katy, and I will give to Jaime.
Okay, 3 messages, 10 seconds each. First one is, we want the largest replenishment for the Global Fund in this year, and we want to all be working closely as partners. UNAIDS is part of the family of organizations that works in this response. We want to go for that and be very supportive. We also like to see that there is support to UNAIDS and to our joint work. Second is, we want policy change. Human rights are very important to achieve changes that are needed also for the response. The money is substantial and a fundamental issue, but there are others. Human rights and policy change, I'm talking about access to medicines. And third, the green and digital recovery is everything when the curve goes down in of the COVID. So we need to make sure that the health investments and the centrality of health investments is part of this green and digital recovery economy we are building back. And I think that's something I would like to see at the G7, that it's not like left aside as a single thing, let's put some money into this, but it's central to the overall future building agenda. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Thanks a lot. And thanks to everyone. Thanks, Katy, Jaime, Mr. Gröhe, Dianne, and also to you, Tilman and Sergius, of course.
Thank you, Melanie.
I would really love to keep speaking to you and discussing to you, because it's really rich, and I hope that the parliamentarians, the other parliamentarians, heard us and will hear that discussion and the ideas. And I would like to say also thank you to Brian again. I don't know, Brian, if you can turn on the camera for 1 second to say goodbye to you. And I would like to hand over, if you can stay a second more, would be great, because I would like to hand over to Frank Mischow from Kindernothilfe. He would just have the last word and the last remarks and the goodbye. So I would like to invite you to stay for a few minutes more if you are able to stay. If not, I just say goodbye and thanks a lot also from Action Against AIDS.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.